Courtrooms usually run on rules, laws, and judgments. But on this day, something extraordinary happened. When boxing legend and Senator Manny Pacquiao walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, nobody expected what was about to unfold. At first, it seemed like a normal hearing. The judge, calm and professional, the audience quietly waiting. But then Manny began to speak. Not about himself, not about his achievements, but about something far deeper. Within minutes, his words cut through the silence of the room. People leaned forward, eyes locked on him, and then the unthinkable happened. Judge Frank Caprio, known for his wisdom and composure, could no longer hold back his tears. This was more than a courtroom moment. It was a lesson about humility, compassion, and the true meaning of justice. Stay with me because what Manny said next will leave you speechless. The courtroom of Judge Frank Caprio was buzzing with its usual rhythm. Cases of parking tickets, minor violations, and heartfelt pleas came one after another. People whispered in the back rows, waiting for their turn, while Judge Caprio presided with his signature calm and kindness. But then something unusual happened. The doors opened, and in walked a man no one expected to see in such a place. Dressed modestly in a simple shirt and slacks, Manny Pacquiao stepped inside. At first, many didn't recognize him. Without the boxing gloves, championship belt, or the entourage usually seen around celebrities, he looked like an ordinary man, but a few gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers quickly spread. Is that Manny Pacquiao, the world champion? What's he doing here? Even Judge Caprio leaned forward, adjusting his glasses as if to confirm what his eyes were telling him. He smiled warmly and said, "Well, this is a surprise, Mr. Pacquiao. Welcome to my courtroom. May I ask what brings you here today?" The room fell silent. Everyone expected Manny to say he had a legal issue or maybe he was just visiting, but the way he stood, calm, humble, almost carrying a weight in his eyes, hinted that something far more meaningful was about to be revealed. Manny cleared his throat, his voice steady but gentle. He wasn't there for fame or for himself. He was there for someone else, someone who couldn't fight for themselves the way he had fought in the ring. As he began to speak, Judge Caprio's eyes softened. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing this was no ordinary case. This wasn't Manny Pacquiao, the boxer. This was Manny Pacquiao, the human being, the man who had risen from poverty, who knew the struggles of ordinary people, and who had come to use his voice for justice and compassion. And though no one in that courtroom realized it yet, they were about to witness a moment so powerful it would bring even Judge Frank Caprio, the man known for his wisdom and composure, to tears. What Manny said next left the entire courtroom stunned. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Manny Pacquiao as he stood before Judge Frank Caprio. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty. It was heavy, charged with anticipation. People leaned forward, their phones discreetly raised to record what felt like the start of something unforgettable. Manny took a deep breath before speaking. His tone wasn't loud or commanding like when he spoke to roaring stadiums. Instead, it was quiet, almost intimate, as though he wanted every single person in the room to feel the weight of his words. "Your Honor," Manny began respectfully, bowing his head slightly, "I am not here for myself. I am here today because of a family that has been struggling, a family I met not long ago. They are hardworking people, honest people, but life has been unkind to them." He paused and the audience shifted in their seats. A woman in the back dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The story was already pulling at their hearts. Manny continued. They were fined heavily for something small, and now they face the choice between paying this penalty or putting food on the table for their children. I could not stand by and watch because I know exactly how that feels. The judge's eyes lifted, his interest peaked. Everyone knew Manny's story of being a fighter, but few understood the depth of his struggles before fame. Manny decided to open that door. "When I was young," he said, his voice catching slightly, "I sold bread on the streets. My family had nothing. Sometimes we didn't eat for a whole day. I know what it means to be judged because of how poor you are. I know what it means to be punished when life has already punished you enough." Gasps echoed softly through the courtroom. Some whispered, "He's telling his own story." Others simply stared, stunned by his humility. Manny looked down for a moment, then back up at Judge Caprio. His eyes glistened with sincerity. "Your Honor, this family does not need more punishment. They need compassion. They need mercy. Because when we show mercy, we are not just helping one family. We are reminding the world what justice truly means." The judge's lips pressed tightly together. He was known for his compassion, for always looking beyond the letter of the law to the spirit of it. But hearing these words from Manny, someone who had lived the hardship he spoke of, struck deeper than anything else. The crowd was hooked. People began nodding in agreement, some even whispering prayers under their breath. One man muttered, "This is why he's a true champion." Manny's wife, sitting quietly in the back row, wiped her eyes. She had seen her husband's strength in the ring countless times, but this was different. This was the strength of a man using his voice for justice, not his fists. As Manny continued, his voice grew firmer, though still calm. We cannot measure a person's worth by the money in their pocket. We cannot decide someone's dignity based on their appearance. Justice should not be a hammer that only crushes the weak. It should be a hand that lifts them when they fall. By now, phones were recording openly. No one wanted to miss a single word. The energy in the room had shifted. What started as an ordinary court session had transformed into a moment of truth that touched everyone present. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his eyes glistening. He had seen countless people stand in that very spot pleading their cases, but never before had a world champion, a senator, and above all, a man of such humility stood there speaking not for himself but for the powerless. The air was thick with emotion, and then came Manny's final words in that moment. Your Honor, I know the law is strong, but I also know mercy makes it stronger. The entire courtroom erupted, not in applause just yet, but in gasps. In stunned silence, in the kind of awe that leaves a permanent mark on the soul. And as Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, blinking rapidly, it was clear he was already fighting back tears. Have you ever seen someone use their influence to help the less fortunate? Comment below and tell me where you're watching this from. The silence in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom lingered like a heavy fog. Manny Pacquiao's words still echoed. Mercy makes the law stronger. It was more than a statement. It was a challenge, a plea, and a truth all wrapped into one. Judge Caprio cleared his throat softly as though to regain composure. Mr. Pacquiao, he said gently, I've heard many people stand before me, but never like this. You speak not just for one family, but for millions who have known hardship. Please continue. And so Manny did. He stepped closer, his voice still calm, but carrying an intensity that commanded the room. Your Honor, when I was a child in the Philippines, we were so poor that my mother often had to choose which of us children could eat that day. I fought not for glory at first, but simply so my family could survive. Every punch I threw was to put rice on our table. Every victory was for them. The audience hung on every word. Many had seen the highlights of his boxing career, the knockouts, the belts, the roaring crowds, but this was a side of Manny most had never truly witnessed, vulnerable, raw, human. He continued, when I look at this family struggling under the weight of a fine they cannot pay, I see myself, I see my mother, I see millions of children who grow up believing the world is against them. And I ask myself, if I had faced not just poverty, but also a justice system that punished me for being poor, would I even be standing here today? Gasps rippled again through the courtroom. A young man in the back whispered, he's speaking for all of us. An elderly woman wiped tears from her cheeks. Even the officers standing near the wall shifted uncomfortably, clearly moved. Manny's children, sitting quietly beside his wife, looked up at their father with wide eyes. They had always known their father as a champion in the ring, but today they were seeing a different kind of fighter, one who wielded words instead of fists. Judge Caprio leaned forward, elbows on the bench, his chin resting on his clasped hands. His eyes shimmered, and for the first time, his usually composed demeanor seemed fragile. Manny softened his tone. Your Honor, I know the law must be respected. Without it, there is chaos. But I also know that law without compassion can become a weapon against the very people it should protect. That is why I stand here today, not asking you to break the law, but to fulfill its higher purpose, justice with mercy. A hush swept across the courtroom, broken only by the sound of someone quietly sobbing in the back. The tension had shifted into something deeper, collective empathy. It was as though everyone present felt themselves reflected in Manny's story, whether they had known hunger, injustice, or the simple pain of being underestimated. And then Manny paused. He glanced toward the struggling family sitting nervously in the front row, the very people he had come to defend. Their clothes were worn, their faces marked by exhaustion. The mother clutched her child's hand tightly, as if afraid they would be judged, not just by the court, but by the world. Manny's voice cracked slightly as he spoke again. Look at them, Your Honor. They are not criminals. They are not dangerous. They are simply poor. If we crush them with punishment, we are not upholding justice. We are destroying hope. And when hope is destroyed, society loses. The words struck like a thunderclap. Several in the audience broke into quiet applause before quickly stopping, unsure if it was appropriate. Judge Caprio didn't admonish them. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, his shoulders trembling ever so slightly. When he opened them again, his gaze met Manny's, and for a split second, the judge wasn't looking at a boxing champion or a senator. He was looking at a man who had once been a hungry boy on the streets, a man who had risen not by stepping on others, but by lifting them. Manny finished softly, almost in a whisper. Justice is not blind, Your Honor. Justice can see, and when it sees suffering, it should not turn away. The room fell utterly silent. Phones recording the moment trembled in hands as though even technology understood the weight of what had just been said. Judge Frank Caprio shifted in his seat, his eyes now red and glassy. He reached for a tissue, dabbing at the corner of his eyes. The courtroom had seen him emotional before. His compassion was legendary, but never like this. He tried to speak, his voice unsteady. Mr. Pacquiao, your words. He stopped, swallowing hard, his lips trembling. They remind me why I chose this seat. To serve, not just to punish, to understand, not just to judge. The audience erupted, some clapping softly, others simply wiping their tears. The struggling family sat frozen, unable to believe what they were witnessing. And Manny, he simply bowed his head in humility, as though the entire weight of his plea had been lifted from his shoulders. The moment wasn't over, but one thing was certain. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a sanctuary of truth, mercy, and humanity. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. The air inside the courtroom was electric. Manny Pacquiao's words had landed like a hammer on stone, cracking open emotions many people tried to keep hidden. But what came next would turn that crack into a flood. For a moment, silence held the room hostage. Judge Frank Caprio sat frozen, his eyes shimmering, while Manny stood with the quiet dignity of a man who had said nothing but the truth. And then slowly whispers began to ripple through the benches. That's Manny Pacquiao, the boxing legend, the senator from the Philippines. He's a world champion, and he's here fighting for this family. The realization spread like wildfire. Some had walked into the courtroom without recognizing him. To them, he was just another man standing at the front pleading for mercy. But now, as recognition dawned, the weight of the moment doubled. This wasn't just anyone. This was a global icon. Yet, here he was, standing humbly as though his fame meant nothing. A young boy tugged at his father's sleeve and whispered, "Dad, that's the fighter we watched on TV." The father nodded, eyes wide, as though even he couldn't believe it. Judge Caprio finally leaned forward, his voice gentle, almost reverent. "Mr. Pacquiao, I must admit, I knew of you, but I did not expect this. Not here, not in my courtroom, and yet I feel as though you were meant to be here today." The crowd murmured in agreement. It was as though destiny itself had arranged this moment. A judge known worldwide for compassion, meeting a fighter known worldwide for humility. Two different worlds colliding in the same pursuit, justice with mercy. But Manny didn't smile. He didn't nod proudly. He simply shook his head softly and said, "Your Honor, I am not here as a champion. I am here as a man who remembers hunger, who remembers being judged, who remembers struggling to survive. Titles and belts do not matter in this room. What matters is humanity." Those words hit harder than any punch he had ever thrown. People were visibly shaken. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others simply bowed their heads as tears welled up. The struggling family, sitting nervously in the front row, could no longer contain themselves. The mother pressed her hands to her face, tears streaming freely, while her husband placed a trembling arm around her shoulders. Their little boy, not fully understanding the magnitude of the moment, clutched his mother's hand and whispered, "Mama, he's helping us." Judge Caprio took off his glasses and set them on the bench. His hands trembled slightly as he rubbed his eyes. He had seen thousands of cases, had been touched countless times, but this was different. It wasn't just the plea, it was who was making it. A man who had every reason to be distant from ordinary struggles, yet chose instead to stand in the very heart of them. The judge's voice cracked as he spoke again. "Mr. Pacquiao, you remind me of something my own father once told me. He said, 'Son, if the law ever blinds you to compassion, you have failed as a judge.' Today, you bring those words back to me with greater force than I could have imagined." The audience broke into soft applause, unable to hold back their admiration. Some even stood, though quickly sat again out of respect for the setting. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried the sincerity of hearts moved beyond measure. Manny turned slightly, glancing at the crowd, then back to Judge Caprio. His eyes were calm, but behind them was a storm of empathy. "Your Honor," he said, his voice deep and steady, I am not asking you to bend the law. I am asking you to show the world that law and love can exist together. That mercy does not weaken justice, it completes it. The judge's breath caught. His lips trembled as he tried to respond, but words failed him. He looked down at the papers before him, his vision blurred by tears he could no longer contain. The cameras of cell phones caught every second. The audience leaned forward knowing they were witnessing history. Not a legal precedent, but a human one. A moment where law bowed to compassion and where a champion reminded the world what true victory looks like. Judge Caprio finally managed to whisper, his voice breaking, "Mr. Pacquiao, you've already won, not in this courtroom, but in the hearts of everyone here." The room erupted, not with noise, but with a powerful silence filled with awe. People wept openly. Some clasped their hands in prayer. Others simply stared at Manny as though seeing him for the very first time. And Manny, he bowed his head once more, as humble as he had been when he walked in. To him, this was not a victory lap. It was a duty fulfilled, but the moment wasn't over yet. The judge still had to make his ruling, and the words he would speak next would not only decide the fate of one struggling family, but would echo far beyond the walls of this small courtroom. What Judge Caprio decided after hearing Manny's plea left the courtroom in tears. Judge Frank Caprio sat motionless, his glasses resting on the bench, his eyes shimmering with tears he could no longer hide. The entire courtroom felt as though it was suspended in time, waiting, holding its collective breath. Manny Pacquiao's words had already shaken the room. But now, as he prepared to speak again, everyone knew the climax was coming. Manny took a small step forward, his voice steady but infused with raw emotion. "Your Honor, I stand before you not to question the law, but to remind us all of its purpose. The law was not created to break the weak, it was created to protect them. If the law does not serve the people with fairness and compassion, then it becomes nothing more than another chain of oppression." The words struck deep. The family sitting at the front wiped their eyes, overwhelmed by the fact that a global icon was defending them as though they were his own. The mother sobbed softly, whispering, "Thank you, Lord," while her husband stared at Manny with disbelief, unable to understand how such grace had found its way into their desperate situation. Manny continued, his voice stronger now, his posture commanding without arrogance. "Your Honor, I have fought battles in the ring where my opponent stood right in front of me. I knew their strength, I knew their punches, but the hardest battles I ever faced were not fought under bright lights. They were fought in the shadows of poverty, hunger, and hopelessness. And I did not win those battles alone. Someone somewhere showed me kindness. Someone showed me mercy." He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. "That mercy gave me the strength to rise, to fight, to become the man you see here today. Without it, I would be nothing more than another forgotten story of a poor boy lost to despair." By now, the audience could no longer contain themselves. Tears flowed freely. Even the officers along the walls lowered their heads in quiet respect. The weight of Manny's testimony pressed on every soul in the room. Judge Caprio reached for another tissue, his hands trembling. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Mr. Pacquiao, you speak as though you have carried the weight of the world on your shoulders." Manny nodded gently. "I have carried my share of weight, Your Honor, and that is why, when I see this family, I cannot remain silent, because to ignore their pain would be to deny my own past. And if I deny where I came from, then I do not deserve the blessings I have today." The judge's tears spilled freely now, rolling down his cheeks as the courtroom watched in stunned reverence. Never before had the man known for his wisdom and restraint been so visibly moved. Manny's voice softened, but his words pierced even deeper. "We cannot measure justice only by punishment. We must measure it by the hope it gives to those who have none. This family does not need a hammer, they need a hand. A hand that lifts them so they may stand and one day lift others." The crowd erupted into quiet sobs and nods of agreement. One woman in the second row whispered, "This is history." Judge Caprio wiped his eyes, trying to steady himself. But Manny pressed on, his final words like a finishing blow, gentle yet undeniable. "Your Honor, I have won world titles. I have heard the roar of millions. I have stood with presidents and kings, but none of that matters here. What matters is this. If we cannot show mercy to the least among us, then we have lost the true meaning of justice. And if my words mean anything, let them be a reminder that mercy is not weakness. Mercy is power, the greatest power we can ever wield." The room fell into absolute silence. No one moved. No one even breathed loudly. It was as though Manny's words had cast a spell over the entire chamber. And then it happened. Judge Frank Caprio, unable to contain himself, lowered his head into his hands and wept openly. The sight of the compassionate judge, revered across the world, brought to tears by the heartfelt plea of a humble champion, broke what little composure remained in the courtroom. People cried freely, some clutched the hands of their loved ones, others simply let their tears fall, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. The family at the center of it all wept uncontrollably, overwhelmed by gratitude, by relief, by the knowledge that someone had finally stood up for them in a world that so often ignored their struggle. And Manny, he did not raise his voice in triumph. He did not smile or gloat. He simply lowered his head, hands folded, his posture one of humility. For him, this was not victory. It was service. It was the fulfillment of a duty larger than himself. Judge Caprio finally lifted his head, his face wet with tears, his voice breaking as he whispered words that carried across the courtroom. "Mr. Pacquiao, you have reminded us all that true justice is not only in the law, but in the heart, and for that, I thank you." The courtroom erupted, not with applause, but with the sound of hearts breaking open. The climax had been reached. The world outside would soon know what had happened here. And then Manny's true identity was revealed to those who still didn't know, and the courtroom's reaction was unforgettable. Judge Frank Caprio's tears still glistened on his cheeks as the courtroom sat in stunned silence. The words of Manny Pacquiao lingered in the air like echoes in a cathedral. No one dared to break the moment. Not even the restless shuffle of papers or the clearing of a throat could be heard. Then from the back, a voice whispered loudly enough for others to catch. "That's Manny Pacquiao, the people's champion." It spread like wildfire. More voices joined. "He's not just a man, he's a world champion boxer, a senator, a philanthropist." Soon the entire courtroom was buzzing with realization. Those who hadn't known him when he first walked in now looked at him with wide eyes. To think a man who had risen from poverty to the pinnacle of global fame was standing here fighting not with fists, but with humility for a family most of the world would never know. The family themselves seemed almost in disbelief. The mother, still clutching her son, whispered through her tears, "A world champion, and he spoke for us." The father placed a hand over his heart, shaking his head as though words would never be enough to describe what had just happened. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, visibly moved. He raised his hand gently, calling for quiet as the murmur swelled. When silence finally returned, his voice broke through, trembling but resolute. "Mr. Pacquiao," he began, "you came here today not to defend yourself, not to claim special treatment, but to stand for those who could not stand for themselves. You reminded this courtroom and perhaps the world that mercy is not weakness. Mercy is strength and justice. Without mercy is no justice at all." He paused, his eyes scanning the courtroom, then rested them on the struggling family. "As for this family, this court rules with compassion. The fine is dismissed, not because of who you are, but because of what you deserve. Fairness." The words landed like a thunderclap. The family gasped, overwhelmed, and the mother burst into sobs of relief, clutching her child tightly. The father covered his face with his hands, unable to believe what he had heard. The audience erupted, not in wild cheering, but in heartfelt applause, rising like a wave of gratitude. Some stood clapping softly, while others simply bowed their heads in prayer. The atmosphere was no longer that of a courtroom. It had become a sanctuary of compassion. Judge Caprio turned back to Manny, his own voice still thick with emotion. "Mr. Pacquiao, you may be a champion in the ring, but today you showed us what it means to be a true champion outside of it. Your words will stay with me for the rest of my life, and I suspect they will stay with everyone who witnessed this moment." The cameras of countless cell phones captured it all. Clips would soon circle the globe, but those in the room knew they had seen something no video could fully capture: the raw, unfiltered collision of justice and mercy. Manny bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Honor. I did not come here for recognition. I came because I know what it is to suffer. And I know what it means when someone shows kindness in the darkest of times." Judge Caprio, still dabbing at his eyes, managed a smile. "And that, Mr. Pacquiao, is why this courtroom and the world is better for having you in it today." The applause grew louder, no longer restrained. Officers, who normally stood stiff and silent, clapped quietly against their uniforms. Bystanders wiped tears while filming with shaky hands. And at the very center of it all, the family wept openly, their burdens lifted in an instant by compassion and justice working hand in hand. As the noise swelled, Manny remained still. No fist raised in triumph, no proud smile, only a gentle bow of the head, as though reminding everyone that humility was the true crown of victory. When the applause finally settled, Judge Caprio looked once more at the family. "This court does not only dismiss your case," he said gently, "it sends you forward with hope. Take this mercy not as a gift, but as a reminder. When you are strong again, lift someone else as you have been lifted today." The family nodded through tears, the mother whispering, "We will, Your Honor, we will." And just like that, the gavel fell. Case dismissed. But what had been delivered was far greater than a legal ruling. It was a lesson the entire world would soon learn. The moment didn't end in that courtroom. What happened next went viral worldwide, spreading Manny's message of justice and compassion to millions. When Judge Caprio's gavel struck the bench, the case was over, but the moment was only just beginning. The small courtroom in Providence had become the birthplace of a story that would ripple across the globe. As people spilled out of the room, phones in their hands, clips already uploading to social media, there was a sense that something historic had just taken place. By the time Manny Pacquiao stepped outside into the sunlight, the video of his speech was already spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, hashtags began to trend from Mercy Strength Pacquiao in court and Simply in Respect. Millions of people across continents were watching Manny's words, watching Judge Caprio wipe tears from his face, watching the family embrace as their burdens were lifted. News outlets picked it up almost instantly. Headlines flashed. Manny Pacquiao moves Judge Frank Caprio to tears and emotional courtroom moment. From the boxing ring to the courtroom, Pacquiao champions justice with humility. A lesson in mercy. Viral video of Manny Pacquiao inspires millions. Comments poured in beneath the videos. People from all walks of life, students, workers, parents, even leaders shared their thoughts. One wrote, "I don't even watch boxing, but this man just knocked me out with his words." Another said, "Justice without mercy is no justice at all." Pacquiao is more than a champion, he's a voice of hope. Across the Philippines, Manny's homeland, the reaction was even more emotional. People filled community halls, churches, and cafes, replaying the video on screens. Many cried, seeing their own struggles reflected in the family Manny defended, and their pride swelled watching one of their own carry their story with such dignity. Even in places Manny had never been, his words found resonance. In classrooms, teachers played the clip to spark discussions about fairness and humanity. In offices, workers shared it to remind each other that compassion still existed. And in courtrooms around the world, judges quietly reflected on what it meant to balance law with mercy. Meanwhile, Judge Caprio himself spoke to reporters outside his courthouse. His voice was still soft, his eyes still red from the earlier tears. "I've seen many cases in my ears, but what Mr. Pacquiao reminded us today is something we all need to hear. The law is not just rules, it is people. And behind every decision, there are lives. That is something I will carry with me forever." As for the family at the heart of it all, their lives were changed in ways they could never have imagined. Freed from the crushing weight of their case, they walked out of the courthouse not just with relief, but with a renewed sense of hope. In an interview days later, the father said, "We thought we were alone, but then a champion stood with us. He gave us more than freedom. He gave us dignity." But perhaps the most powerful moment came from Manny himself. Speaking humbly to the press, he brushed off praise. "I am not a hero," he said quietly. "I am just a man who knows what it is to suffer. If I have a voice, I will use it to remind others that mercy and justice must walk together. That is all." The video's reach soared into the tens of millions. Celebrities reposted it, activists quoted it, leaders referenced it in speeches, and ordinary people, people who had never set foot in a courtroom, found courage in it to believe that kindness still had a place in the world. The irony was not lost on anyone. Manny Pacquiao, the man who had built his legacy with his fists, had now changed the world with his words. And so, the story of that day was etched into collective memory, not just as a courtroom case dismissed, but as a global reminder of what justice truly means. Because at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Laws may guide us, but compassion defines us. If you believe no one should be judged by appearance, status, or circumstance, only by their humanity, type respect in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire hope and justice.